Hello, Muscat. How are you? Well, I might seem a little bit distracted today. I had a very strange telephone call. I had a beautiful show in a gallery, and I called the gallery owner, and I said, well, how are we doing here? Are things selling? And he said, well, you know, I got some good news and some bad news. A man came in, and he looked around, and he asked me a question. He said, I like this art, but, you know, is it the kind of art that's going to be worth more after the artist is dead? And I said, oh, surely, this is wonderful work. And the man bought everything. I said, that's great. I said, well, there's some bad news. He was your doctor. So the idea of art as a commodity, as art as something that you create in your studio all by yourself, and then you put it in a show and you try to sell it, is an idea really of our time. It's an invention of the 20th century. And most times in history, artists never worked that way. They didn't really have to worry about art being a commodity. It was a process, it was an experience. And the artists, therefore, had a completely different relationship to society than they do today. In our time, the idea of art as something that you create off in a little corner, that you prepare in a show, some people come and you sell it, is very central. And in fact, in English, and I don't know about Arabic, but in English, our definition of creativity is the ability to produce an original work of value. That is, that we assign value to the work and not the creative process. Now, this definition is actually quite absurd if you think about it, because let's take, for instance, Van Gogh, the great painter. He works all his life, pouring his heart out, doing paintings. He can't sell a single painting. After he's dead, the paintings sell for millions and millions of dollars. So the question is, did Van Gogh become creative after he was dead? I don't think this is really possible. Now, what I've always admired about the Renaissance is that the artist had a completely different relationship to society than we have today. The artist was a protagonist. The artist designed visions for the future. People came to the artist, either the church or the great noble families, or the public and commerce. And they hired the artist to create visions of the society they wanted to have happen. So I always felt that the Renaissance was really to be envied for that reason and for another reason. The other reason was their fantastic skill level. Artists would do architecture, they would do sculpture, they would do paintings, they would write music. They would be able to do all of these different things. And I know that as a young art student, we were always a little bit overwhelmed with the idea of the Renaissance. Where did these people come from that they were so fabulously brilliant that they got to do all these things? And why is it so hard for us today to study art? So a lot of my life has been spent trying to figure out, where did that toolbox come from? Where did those perceptual skills come from? And why don't we seem to have them anymore? And if we were to get those skills again, what would we do with them today? We wouldn't necessarily do the works of the past, although everything you've been seeing has not been Renaissance works. They're my own works in architecture and painting and sculpture. But I was also able to have an experience to take the skills and to create something different, which I will be sharing with you tonight. But before I share the works with you, I would like to share a little bit about the journey of study that I had to undergo, or that I didn't have to undergo, that I decided to undergo, and that allowed me to have an experience, I think, which was rather unique in the world, and which I hope eventually to share with the entire global population. As a young person, 17 years old, I really loved to use art to study nature. I felt that art was more of a natural science. It wasn't really so much about expressing myself as it was about learning from what I observed. learning from observation through art is something that we've pretty much lost in our time, I think, in the West. And it was vital to the Renaissance artist. Why? Well, you'd say we could just take a photograph. Why would I sit there for 2 hours and draw a shell? You can take a photograph, but the photograph won't teach you anything about the shell. The point of doing the drawing is to communicate with your observation of the object and to extrapolate from it the forms. What are forms? Forms are the abstract ideas that objects recount to us. So a seashell, for instance. The seashell has all of its complexity, but underneath all that complexity is a spiral. And within that spiral, in turn, are principles of symmetry and proportion. And those are the principles which we will then be able to use to create our own works. So this was a set of geometrical drawings. My two obsessions were, one is studying from nature, the second one was geometry. And I had a very ancient idea of geometry called sacred geometry, which is no longer taught in any school system as far as I'm aware of. But sacred geometry was what artists and architects used in past centuries to create the beautiful temples and cathedrals and mosques that are so much of our human heritage. I think it's a true pity that geometry isn't taught today as a visual art. It's taught in a different way, partly because of a man called Descartes. Before I get to that, I'd like to say these early things, these were early geometrical studies I did as a young art student, probably before the age of 20, which led me then to be able to compose and create original works. This is now a floor plan using the geometrical ideas for a villa that I designed for a rather large residence in Santa Barbara, California. And here's a picture of the residence itself. Classical art, to me, is a combination between careful observation of nature and the understanding of ideal form. Ideal form meaning the idea that is behind nature and gives nature its beauty and harmony. My studies, actually, when I was young, led me to get my first job actually working at NASA. So at the age of 21 years old, I went to the Jet Propulsion Laboratory during the golden age of space exploration. And this was my first drawing for NASA, which was an ion mass spectrograph, which showed all of the pattern of the light rays going through and how the instrument would read that pattern. We forget about it today, but up till the 1980s, space missions were actually drawn by artists. This is a drawing for the Apollo spacecraft that landed on the moon. We didn't have computer graphics, and so artists actually trained themselves to read the blueprints and diagrams and to do perspective visions of space projects. And this was actually the end of a very long human experience, because when you think of geometry starting out as a sacred study in the temples of Egypt and ancient Persia, going all the way through history, Western Europe, ending up as technical drawing and then designing spacecrafts. But what happened in 1980 is some very clever people made something called CGI, computer graphics. 2,000 years of human history of artists doing drawings wiped out. Nobody needs to do drawings anymore. This is very similar to what happened 100 years ago when we invented the camera and people thought you didn't have to do classical drawing anymore. So all of these years, the instruments I used at NASA were very similar to instruments used in the 17th century, which were used mostly up to the time of Descartes, who basically developed Cartesian coordinates, and artists or mathematicians stopped drawing diagrams and started using numbers instead. This is drawings for NASA, just to finish up this part of the presentation. Another passion of mine was classical drawing. I wanted to understand how the Renaissance artists did those beautiful drawings. So I went to Italy, sat in front of the ancient Greek and Roman sculptures, and drew for 2 years. And during that time, I developed a drawing style of my own, which I could use to do drawings like this one. This was one of my first drawings I did in the classical style. And this is another original drawing. So I started to assume this is original drawing as well, this drawing style based on the Renaissance, but then started to make my own creations. Some different drawings done in the classicizing style, and then eventually to create my own compositions, which started to become a little bit different than what would have been seen in the Renaissance. But in order to support this, I had to have a way of making money. The only way I could figure out to make money was in Italy. I didn't speak the language, I didn't have a permit to work, was to sit on the floor, paint drawings in chalk, put a bucket out, and get tips. This is a very old art form, centuries old and documented since Victorian England. The irony about it is that even though nobody would love to see their son sit on the street and try to get tips, like me in this picture, I actually earned 3 times the salary I earned at NASA. So this gave me the ability to travel around, to express myself, and to meet people, to become part of society, really, out in the middle of the public. I started doing copies. I also did original works. This is, for instance, an original work. I found that people couldn't tell my original works from the copies. So I had a second problem, which was, now that I had taken on this language of classicism, how would I distinguish my own works as being modern works? I created pastels. I did a whole lot of things to amplify this art form. The solution came to me when I decided I could take the perspective geometry I was using at NASA, combine it with the classical drawing, combine it with the chalk painting, and create something maybe that's never been seen before. One of the perspective problems was the difference between wide-angle perspective, what's called rectilinear, when the lines are straight. You can see in this diagram the spheres distort, but if I photograph the diagram with a wide-angle lens, the spheres turn back normal again. So my concept was to take the geometry of the back of the eye, spread it out over the pavement, and this is what happened. So this is okay. So this is the projection of my imagination onto the pavement. From the other side, it looks very strange. But from the right side, it gives a significant illusion. I was able, in the next decade, to teach 100,000 school children, thousands of artists. I got a wonderful medal from the Kennedy Center for it. But the great triumph was to bring this art form back from the grave and to make it into a vibrant new art form, which was recognized by Pope John Paul II, who signed my composition at the right hand of God, and has spread all over the world. So starting from an art form which was a dying art form, now on the internet you can see literally hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of pictures. Okay, so just to say that my goal in life is to take the knowledge that I have had to learn for myself outside of the school system, outside of college, outside of art school, and what I would like to do is now repropose it as something that people can study in our time, young artists can study in our time, learn these skills. I think that the Italian Renaissance or the European Renaissance, there were several hundred artists that worked at that time. Now we have a global community of millions and millions of people. Imagine if this skill level and these ideas were available globally to people. Imagine the architecture, imagine the paintings. Imagine all of the different traditions that we would be able to bring up from the past and to create a new society and a new vision of art. So although I respect modern art, I respect contemporary art, I feel that traditional art is very much like classical music. It's a tradition that should be carried on parallel to contemporary art, informing it. And I feel that when we lost the ability to do these traditional drawings, and we lost the ability with hand-drawn perspectives and with understanding geometry as an artistic expression, what happened was we lost possibility. because there's so much in our past, there's so much in culture that we can resurrect and that we can use to create new and brilliant things. It's really tragic to let any tradition die, whether it's Chinese brush painting, whether it's Islamic calligraphy, or Islamic geometry, which I think would be a powerhouse of design ideas. Any design tradition becomes dormant when it's not used. And any tradition like it has a creative potential which is explosive. As we get to the end of the information age, as I see it, we're going to go back into a skills age, an age of conceptual skills, where too many people will have access to information and people are going to need to be able to do things. So it's important for younger people to understand that conceptual skills are going to be the next age, the age that comes after the information age, which is already almost gone. So I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and think about when you have young people in your family who want to become artists, instead of discouraging art, think about making it the attainment of skill. Skill is going to be our future. So once again, thank you very much.